Well, it's up to you.
The world is watching, or at least two of them. Well, welcome back. Hope you had a nice lunch. It's probably pretty obvious by implication from everything we were talking about this morning, but I want to touch briefly on specialness. There's no such thing as specialness. Or you could say, on the other hand, it's all specialness. It can be very subtle and all pervasive to be chasing after specialness. The grass is greener on the other side. Somewhere out there is something better. And we're all very familiar with this, I'm sure. But there is absolutely no such thing, since everything is this present actuality. It cannot be more or less special than itself. It is, if there's special, this is it. If there's no special, this is it. But there's no special here and less special here. It's all itself. It's all this actuality. And all of these ways we have of classifying according to our human classification of things of, oh, this is better than that, pain is better than, sorry. One of these days I'll get that straight. Pleasure is better than pain, rich is better than poor, whatever. Rock is better than classical, or classical is better than rock, so on and so forth. It's all just gamesmanship. It's all defining things into existence and then playing games about which one's winning and which one's losing. So that was, let's see, that was a cheat, since I forgot the cool thing I was going to talk about, but I just remember the cool thing I'm going to talk about, so now I'll talk about that. Although what I said about specialness, it applies. Okay. I forgot it again. Okay. Forget it. It'll come. What goes around comes around. So it'll be back. So, one very interesting aspect of yoga is to, in terms of the practice of yoga, is to be like in a retreat like this or in a situation like this morning where we're kind of just really taking in, really dipping into it. And then you go out to lunch and you're walking, you're chatting with friends and you're looking around at things and doing your stuff. So there can be this kind of, being into sort of intensive engagement and then just relaxing back into your normalcy. And this cycle is of the essence in yoga, to really dig in, to really be noticing what this is and really be profoundly engaged with it and really into the astounding nature of it. And then you drift off and you're back into your normalcy and you're worrying about this or thinking about that or arguing about this. And then again, and then the cycle goes around again and then you come back sooner or later and here you are again really into it. And this cycle is where you discover the sameness of intense engagement and just your normal frame of mind, which ties in, of course, it's related to the specialness thing because meditation is special and watching TV isn't, and even as you are a sophisticated yogi and theoretically that's not the case, still there's liable to be a subliminal tendency of, God, I'm just watching TV. I should be really doing something cool. Or I'm doing something cool. I really should be watching TV. But this sort of back and forth is like a natural blending, a natural mixing that over time you come to see more and more clearly the sameness of it, that it doesn't really matter. It's all good. You know, you get the advantage of what's present in the way that it is present, and then when something else, let's say predominant characteristics, is present, you get the benefit of that. And again, you get more and more clearly the sense that this never gains anything, never loses anything. It just endlessly displays aspects of its flavor, of its character, displays its richness in all different guises, in all different modes. And there's no hierarchy. It's all just revelations of more and more aspects of this actuality that is here. So how's the retreat going so far for you?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. That's a pretty safe answer.
So there's this almost a dichotomy paradox, maybe, of I get that there's a sense of how is this, and I think it was James mentioned, how is that going to help me do something? I can't remember what it was exactly, but that notion of how is it going to help me, then my mind goes to this notion of survival and all the concepts around that. There's a sense of how is this going to help me reinforces the me.
Right.
And so when you investigate that, and again, going back to trying to find an absolute truth or an unequivocal truth.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. It resolves into a subjective this. It seems a tricky road to go. The me part eventually kind of disappears, but you can't encourage it to disappear in a way. But lo and behold, at some point you realize there's a realization of some sort that, wait a second, I've just stepped into something that doesn't include me, and yet is me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on the journey there, the me seems to get, it's like the more the world becomes globalized, the more we fight for our autonomy.
Yeah.
They kind of go hand in hand until one of them has to give way, and usually it's obviously subjectivity is the card.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's as you say, it's very interesting. You know, when as yoga progresses, as unfoldment progresses, it becomes clearer and clearer that you're not me, and yet me never really goes away. Me is here as much as it ever was, but the here-ness of me, again, is something that you can't really find. It's not an actual me, it's just a flavor, a seeming.
Right.
I mean, the very nature of this is that it's like mirages. It endlessly puts out all of these seemings, you know, just nonstop barrage of seemings, none of which actually are any particular way, even though they seem to be, they claim to be, and none of which, all of which are present, but none of which amount to anything. And me is one of these seemings, you know, just said this, oh, I'm here, I'm me, you know, sure, but you're looking for it, it doesn't, you can't find it. But it doesn't go away, you know. But as yoga progresses, that you can't find it becomes clearer and clearer, so it doesn't need to go away. You know, the seemings are seemings becomes clearer and clearer, so they don't need to. They aren't problems anymore. They're just these endless dreams, these endless visions of possibility that never actually concretize into anything.
They don't show up necessarily different, but suddenly they appear differently. The same story. I still have my same. Somebody cuts me off on the 405. That story shows up immediately, but then I realize, oh wow, check you out. Check where you're going with this.
Yeah.
And check how that's showing up.
And check out this.
And then I go, oh, check out that happen. Check out you actually going there right now. And it's as though the me becomes an overlay or an underlay. Rather than the place from which one's looking, it just becomes part of an overlay of
Yeah.
how I create constellations out of this static.
Yeah.
This, yeah.
Exactly. You know, there's all these virtual constellations, none of which are really there, but any of which are viable,
Mm.
you know, as you know, as perspectives, as arbitrary perspectives, but they aren't really there, and they don't stand up, and they don't need to, but they're as available, you know,
Right.
totally available.
And I sense that there's this proclivity that this wave function or whatever is going, it seeks out particular patterns in thisness. It gravitates toward,
Yeah.
it keeps wanting to create the same
Yeah.
image. And
Very, very good point. Now, this is getting into karma. We haven't talked about karma today. Karma is really, really interesting. The fact that your life tends to look the way it does. Why does your life tend to look like your life looks? You know, sort of not repetitively, but sort of like a strange attractor that it, you know, it seems that the shit that seems to happen to you seems to keep happening more or less.
Yeah.
And the stuff that happens to me seems to keep happening, and it's different kind of stuff. So what's up with that? Why is it not all plain vanilla? You know, and this is the mystery of karma. Why are you the way that you are? Why are you just sort of some global, you know, everythingness or something? But it's not like that. Things are very sort of particularized. You know, you like what you like, you don't like what you don't like, you do what you do, you don't do what you don't do. And all of this is like that. Given that this is absolutely unpatterned and absolutely infinite, how is it that it seems to look like that? And, you know, karma is a great mystery. Of course, it's a paradox, as everything that's actual is, you know. And this gets into the nature of patterning. So everything that appears in experience is, you know, you can call it patterning. So in your visual field, you know, the mind sees patterns. So in my imagination, I draw, you know, an imaginary outline around your body and say all the colors that are in the visual field that are inside that outline are Henry, and everything outside is not Henry. So I've divided the universe into two things, Henry and not Henry, in my imagination. So I do this because of the patterns. So the patterning, I can do this because the Henry pattern has a certain degree of coherence, apparent coherence, relative to the non-Henry patterns. And yet, if I look closely at the Henry pattern, I can't pin down what the pattern actually is, because it's too much information. It's infinite. It's unresolvable. It's absolutely dynamic. It's ever changing. So the pattern is recognizably what it is, but it's actually unpatterned. You know, which of course is complete gibberish. You know, that just doesn't compute. And yet, this is what we have. So we're in the strange situation of infinite patterning, all of which is completely unpatterned.
And yet there it is.
And yet here it is. But the it that is here isn't anything in particular, even as it is everything in particular. It's total gibberish. But see, this is powerful because we're used to the patterns part, but we're not used to recognizing that the patterning is actually unpatterned because you can't pin down exactly what it is, which is very powerful. You know, this is how one discovers liberation from karma. Liberation from karma isn't sort of taking an eraser and erasing all the patterns into some plain vanilla, some blank, pure white light or something. It's seeing that all the patterns are actually not. They're actually not patterned because the patterns don't resolve. They are coherent. If I study the U pattern in my experience, it doesn't come together into some essence. The more I study it, the more divergent information I find, all of which diverges from the other information I find. And if I look at any portion of that diverges from the other sub-aspects of that part I'm investigating. I look into any of that, it diverges. So the more I look into you, the more you spread out. The less closely I study you, the more coherent you are. And this is how the coherence of patterns is maintained, by not looking too closely. If you look too closely at what's really there in your experience, it opens up. It diverges. You know, I just glance at this, it's just a chair, bang. You know, but if I really examine it, you know, what shape is it, what color is it, what texture is it, it's like, wow, there's a lot of information there. And then I look closer and, wow, there's really a lot of information there. And then I look closer and the wows ensue forever. And I never find the chair. All I have is this astounding universe of information, none of which really has anything to do with any other of which. It doesn't come together into an essence. It doesn't come together into a coherence. It just endlessly diverges. And so this is the strangeness of pattern, the strangeness of karma. Which is why when you look for anything, you don't find it. If you look superficially, everything is very obvious. The chair is a chair, you're you, the room's the room. I look more closely, it's like, where do you go? Where is the chair? Where are you? Where is the room?
But isn't there like an essence that sort of unifies everything, which is what you call like this or radiant or presence or whatever?
Well, you could say there is in a meta sense, but you can't find it. I mean, presence, radiant presence is the ultimate mirage. It's completely blatantly obvious. It's the sole actuality, and yet you can't find it. You can't pin it down. You can't find it. You can't. Everywhere you look, you see nothing else, and yet you look and try and pin it down, try and find it, try and get a handle on it. Where? What do you grab? It's subtle. It's very subtle.
So when you say it's unresolvable, you mean at the material level it's completely?
No, I mean at any level. It doesn't resolve into a coherence. It doesn't resolve into one thing being one way.
It does feel complete.
Oh, it's absolutely complete. It's complete because there's nothing missing. And everything is it. But it's not a completeness of coming together into simplicity. It's a completeness of being entirely inclusive. It's a completeness of inclusivity, let's say. That might be a good way to put it. Nothing missing.
Earlier you were talking about how there is no one state that's special versus the other. And you said that like with watching TV or sitting there meditating is, one is not preferential to the other. Could it be that that's also something that's paradoxical in the sense that, it's not, one is not more special than the other, but from a liberation standpoint, one could use yoga or a meditative state more productively towards liberation rather than watching TV.
Well, this is interesting. This is getting into where you're at, and this is the essence of yoga. It's very important with yoga to work with where you are at, where you are, not to work with it in some broad theoretical way. So if you're in a place where meditation is valuable to you, do meditation. But that doesn't mean that meditation is ultimately valuable. But being in that place and working with meditation will take you to the next place that you are, so to speak. I'm using place, obviously, in a loose sense. The next perspective, and you may get to a point where watching the TV may seem to be really valuable, more valuable than the meditation. Because the very nature of yogic engagement is that it transforms fundamentally as unfoldment proceeds. At the beginning of yoga, one is generally trying to come to recognize the presence of reality in the context of one's interpretations. So it's basically trying to find actuality because one's enmeshed in one's interpretations. As yoga proceeds, the relationship between the interpretations and naked reality evolves, and the second half of yoga consists of the opposite. you start moving into the interpretations and see that they are themselves actual reality. So the first half of yoga, you're kind of moving away from interpretations into naked experience, let's say. In the second half of yoga, you do just the opposite. So the kind of question about, well, TV versus meditation depends on, well, what phase are you in? Where are you at? What's relevant to you? And so this is why it's very important to self-assess, to have a sense of where you're getting a wow factor and hit on that.
Is there a good way to sort of, rather than using conceptual overlays of like, oh, I should meditate an hour a day, or I should be doing yoga right now, or for that matter, I should just not be giving a fuck and watching TV or whatever. Is there a way to really feel into authentically where you're at and work with where you're at, rather than sort of listening to these shoulds or shouldn'ts?
Yeah, well, I mean, this develops. You develop a sensitivity. You develop more and more of a barometer as to what's going on with you as yoga proceeds. And initially, you just flail around. But as you flail around, you begin to develop certain intuitions, certain senses about what's what. And then you rely on those to do more experiments and then develop even more sensitivity and so on. So the whole thing sort of bootstraps itself up. You learn how to do it by doing it. But you have to do the work. See, the nature of yoga is it can't be done for you. So, for example, I can outline very rough guidelines and theoretical guidelines and even give practical advice, but you're the one that has to see for yourself. You have to develop the facilities yourself, the faculties yourself, to be able to learn what to do and to learn how to do it and to learn how to gauge if you're doing it well.
And
as you do that, that will spontaneously lead you to the next step as it develops, because your yoga will develop, and as it develops, your engagement with it will change. So that, you can't say that, oh, there's one thing you do and you do it this way and that's all you do. It's not like that at all. Yoga is about exploring your experience. And so how do you explore experience? Well, at the beginning, you just do it any way you can. And as it goes on, you develop more and more subtlety, more and more sensitivity. And so you're doing exploration in different ways and so on and so forth, all of which develops as you build up skills and abilities and sensitivities.
Is one's own sort of happiness and openness a good barometer to sort of gauge whether you are having success with what you're doing with the yoga?
To some degree, not necessarily. Portions of yoga might lead you into real unhappiness, a real challenge. It depends. But overall, you could say, yeah.
Just literally, like you have, it's like a feeling into it.
The real sign, probably the most global sign of progress in yoga, is the development of subtlety, the development of nuance, getting more and more comfort with ambiguity.
Paradox.
Yeah. At the beginning of yoga, this is this and that's that, and you want to learn how to get from this to that. And as yoga develops, you learn that, well, that this is and this is and that's aren't so simple. And and so you're doing a different kind of a thing. But it progresses gradually. But basically, you're coming to recognize what experience really is in the initial half. And then the second half of yoga is learning that what you've discovered that experience includes all of experience. So the first half is discovering what it is, and the second half is seeing the way that applies absolutely, comprehensively, and universally. So initially, you could put it simply, you're getting out of interpretations more into direct experience. And the second half, You're going from direct experience into interpretations and seeing that they are in fact direct experience as well. And then at the end, there's nothing left but radiant presence. In a fundamental sense, in yoga, you're on your own. Where you're at is not where anyone else is at. So you're exploring your own unique condition in your own unique way, and you have your own unique resources to bring to bear on it, and you have your own unique blind spots and challenges that you need to develop ways to overcome or work around. And everyone's different. If people were fundamentally the same, it would be easy, but everyone's completely different and unique in terms of their nature and abilities and liabilities. So you have to discover and take advantage of your nature to work around your particular challenges. And within that entire milieu, you learn to investigate what this is, what you are.
Peter, in your book, you talk about the clear light.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by the clear light?
The clear light is presence. The clear light is actually radiant presence. You can, if you want to, you can emphasize the presence part of radiant presence. If you're not clear on it, what I mean by radiant presence is why I use these two words instead of just one word, is that it's paradoxical and seems to have two opposite aspects to it, even though it's one thing. Its presence is absolutely constant, absolutely unvarying. It's present, it is. That has absolutely no fluctuation whatsoever. It's completely rock solid, constant. The radiance, though, what it looks like, it's absolutely as the opposite. It has absolutely no constancy. It's absolutely completely variable. It's always changing, never repeating. And yet, it's one thing. So it's one thing that is both absolutely unwaveringly present and completely dynamic and changing and infinitely different than itself. But it never becomes, it's infinitely different than itself. In other words, everything you experience, all the differences that appear in your experience, but they're all one thing. They're just this experience, they're just this presence. So it's, it's a pure paradox. You can't make sense of it. And yet this is it. It's this one thing that is, both those ways, although they are actually two ways. It's just one way that when to conceive of it or describe it, we have to talk about it in these opposite ways. It's absolute singleness that is absolutely infinitely different. It's absolute difference that is absolutely infinitely single. Go figure.
The absolute solidity if you might call
Sure.
it that.
Or absolute actuality. I think actuality is a good word, but yeah.
Well, I'm talking about like the permanence, the unchanging
Yeah.
quality of the presence part of radiant presence.
Mhm.
That can be felt, right?
Sure, it's all felt.
I mean, a feeling of concreteness or something.
Absolutely. Well, I like this word actuality. The feeling of actuality. This is actual. You know, and again, you can't really pin down or define exactly what you mean by that, but it's completely self-evident. It's, self-verifying. This is actual. This is real. This is here. This is. It is present. It's totally concrete. It's complete felt. It's a complete felt, self-verifying obviousness. And yet, you go looking for it, you can't find it. You can't pin it down. It's completely peculiar, completely strange. A lot of development in yoga is learning to become comfortable with ambiguity, with things being neither this nor that, and have that not be an issue or a problem. And again, it's a challenge because for our entire lives, we've been indoctrinated that things are this or that. And when you discover, well, things aren't really this or that, it's not really like that, it can take a while. It can take a very long while to really learn to be more and more comfortable with that.
It's an interesting turn of events. I don't know. It makes so much sense, but like 2 years ago, that was like I kind of understand what he's talking about. But there's a sense that shows up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's bizarre.
It is bizarre. I mean, yoga is wonderful. It kind of does itself. It explains itself as by happening.
Yeah.
You figure out what it's about as you do it.
It kind of shows up.
Yeah, it shows up. And it spontaneously, it spontaneously develops subtlety. It spontaneously develops the ability to include it, all aspects of itself without conflict. Which initially it seems like, really?
Yeah. We were getting out of LA and we were there for that ain't a long story. I was buying gas before I knew it. We were talking, I'm going to get gas tomorrow, and we're chatting, and I'm at a gas pump, and I'm pumping gas. I guess I'm buying gas today. Seriously, I just kind of woke up, pumping gas into the car for tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, I guess this is what you're doing. At times, it feels like that. It feels
Sure.
like, okay.
Sure. I mean, you sit there and look at what's happening and how it happened and how can it be happening, and
Right.
it stops making sense pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, and then once you get the frustration of trying to make sense, it's forget it.
Yeah, it's easy. Whatever.
I heard something along the lines of consciousness can't see itself, but it can notice itself noticing. Is there any validity or is that like?
You tell me.
Well, I agree with the part that you can't see it, obviously, because it's like.
Yeah.
But you talk a lot about noticing, so was wondering if the noticing is like in the noticing, you start noticing what's noticing.
Well, experience is noticing. You're noticing experience. You're noticing what is being noticed. Right now, there's noticing of you in this conversation. You know, and there's noticing of the noticing of you in this conversation. And it's hard to find much else than that noticing. The noticing is more obvious in a way than you are, and then the conversation is. Radiant presence is oh, we won't go there. Forget it.
Is the presence the noticing, and the radiance? The presence is the noticing, and the radiance is something that it feels like it's something that's flashing before it a little bit.
It seems that way, but ultimately they're one, so it's not like that. The presence is the radiance is the presence. To the extent the presence can be said to seem like consciousness, and the radiance can be said to seem like apparition. But when you're looking for apparition, you can't find it separate from consciousness. And when you're looking for consciousness, you can't find it separate from apparition. So that just doesn't stand up. It sort of stands up in terms of, you know, sort of loosely speaking. But, you know, in yoga, you're not going for approximations. You're going for the kill. I mean, you want to really just keep going on in there. You know, get it finer, get it closer. Really, just really go into it.
You wouldn't call that a concentration or focus, would you?
No, it's not necessarily concentration in the usual sense of that word. It's heightened sensitivity. It's like when the yogi develops the ability to recognize more finely, or to recognize that they are recognizing more finely, to recognize that you actually see more than you've been aware that you're seeing. And when you recognize that, then you see more, even though you've always been seeing more. And then you recognize that you can see more than that. And you recognize that you're actually recognizing that you've always been seeing more than that, but you haven't recognized that you see more than that, and so on. So it's like almost like a zooming in on a microscope or something.
Because with me, it seems like as soon as I get the thought, oh, okay, I got to really zoom in on this little thing. I got to get this thing. I got to do something. And I see that, I go, wait a minute, I'm already off track. I can see that I'm trying to make something happen instead of noticing, you know, what's already the case.
Yeah, sure. But you notice that, so that's right. Yeah.
When you look at something, it keeps diverging, at least in the visual, well, not just visual, it's, my experience is more vibration is everything.
What?
More vibratory.
Sure, what do you mean by that, though?
It's more fuzzy.
Right. Well, fuzzy is a kind of a divergence. And if you look more closely at the fuzzy is fuzzy.
it's hard to put words to it.
Yeah, it's impossible to put words. It's like if there's a straight line on a piece of paper and you look closer at it and you see that the line's really sort of a little jagged, you didn't notice because you weren't thinking closely enough, it's fuzzy. So you thought it was a straight line, but it doesn't converge on being a straight line. It converges on being, a fuzzy line. And look closer at that, and maybe the fuzzy line is actually a little fuzzy too, and each of the little jags is also a little fuzzy. And you discover another layer of fuzziness. Basically, the closer you zoom, the more you zoom in, the more fuzziness you find, until there's no line at all. There's just fuzziness. But the line didn't go away.
You're doing this with a visual, or are you literally zooming in?
Well, you can do it that way, but in any degree of experience, by being with it more sensitively, it doesn't have to be a spatial thing, like zooming in with visual, for example. Just being with the experience more sensitively, being more precisely engaged with the detail of it, whatever that looks like.
And that's kind of a feeling into the experience.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in one sense, the essence of yoga is developing greater sensitivity to the nuance of experience.
What's the deal with in some of these traditions, like the fasting and the abstinence and all of that? Like Jesus fasted for 40 days. Like, is that like to have uncomfortable sensations to such an extent that you could actually pierce through? Is it easier to pierce through in those states because you can really see through what those sensations are because they're so palpably uncomfortable?
I wouldn't put it that way. I'd say it's more a matter of it being out of your normalcy. If things are more or less a similar way for you, then there's a kind of a dullness that sets in of being with things as being more or less that way. But when you change things, when you push the envelope and find yourself in some degree of unfamiliarity, of sensation or whatever, then you have a fresh perspective, and you're jarred out of that sense of normalcy and all, and so you're spontaneously more sensitive to, well, what's going on here? So if you're normally sexually functional and you have abstinence, it's all of a sudden things are quite different, perspectives different, or the other way around, in fact. Or if you're ordinarily, sober, you get intoxicated because it's a fresh perspective, or vice versa. If you're ordinarily not sober, straighten up, because it's not the one condition or the other that's an advantage. It's the shift out of a normalcy, which can seem to be the basis for dullness and insensitivity.
But do things like fasting and sexual abstinence in and of themselves create, for lack of a better word, a pure state, like a more receptive state in some way?
That's the sales pitch.
I could come up with a lot of witty answers,
Feel free.
which all basically amount to no.
Can you speak to the difference between a state, which in my question is a misinterpretation of recognition? For instance, I feel, I get it, I feel, I feel like the universe right now, it's great. I had a cup of coffee and I had a good nap and I'm waking up and the sun's shining and I feel at one with the world. That's a state.
Well, you can
an interpretation.
You can define it as a state and an interpretation, but it's also is recognition. First of all, there's nothing but recognition. So every state is recognition. The trick is to be able to recognize within the state that it is recognition,
Right.
as opposed to just going to the state, in which case the recognition is still happening, but you're oblivious to it because you're busy, orienting to it as a state.
Right.
Every state is recognition. There is nothing but revelation. Every instant, right here, right now, this is the complete, naked, full-on revelation of the absolute. Period. And that's always the case.
Right. Be a
And it may always seem to be a state or not. So the trick is not to worry about states, but ignore the states and go to go to the money shot. It's always radiant presence. It's always nothing but radiant presence. And yoga is enabling yourself to recognize that fact and ultimately to know that fact absolutely.
In the story of me, that was salient to me at some point because there was a searching for that state, the sense of, be walking around in white robes. And
that's a very, very, very common.
Disaster.
Yeah, very, very common misinterpretation. When you're starting out, you think you have a fantasy of what it's going to look like, and then you try and approximate or look for that, or at least have in the back of your mind something like that.
Yeah.
But then of course you wise up. As things proceed, you go, oh, wait a minute, this wasn't in the manual.
I mean, that creates as much conflict as anything.
Sure.
Yeah.
Peter, you said it's about when you're in the state being in recognition.
Yes.
Recognition of what?
Of the presence of experience, or of what I call radiant presence. In other words, if you orient to the state as a state, then you're being with it as you're interpreting what it is. You're orienting to it in terms of what you're interpreting it to be. Whereas if you're in recognition, you're oriented to it as what it actually is, which is this undefinable actuality that is actually here. And it's subtle because they coexist.
It's also just a recognition of your beingness.
Yes, exactly so. But there's not really, there's no just about it, but yeah. Oh, it's just beingness. Right? Oh. Why didn't you say so? Thought it was something interesting.
So you're in that recognition and the sun is shining. It's really beautiful. When that starts to fade and you start to get grumpy or anxious, that would be a really important time to see what the revelation is still happening.
Yes, absolutely. And this is inevitable, but also you could say the advantage of these constant shifts of experience. Like, sometimes you're meditating and you're in this wow, this is incredible. And then you get up and you go to the bathroom and you're hungry and you're, if you get distracted and you think, you answer some emails and you get pissed off at somebody or whatever. It's like, and that's it. This is what happens. You're in these, you find yourself in these wonderful revelations and then you drift off into your normal life and then you come back. But the drifting off into normal life is not losing anything. It's where the real power of yoga is, the opportunity to recognize it. Wow, this is it too. And that, of course, is that's really very mature yoga. That's where you're really, you're getting it the way it actually is. This astounding condition is not dependent upon what it looks like. It's not dependent upon what state it seems to be. And when you hit that, then you can never lose it. You always have it, and that's realization. Regardless of what the state seems to be, or what you seem to be doing or not doing, or how you seem to be, you can be ignoring it and be pissed off at it, and and saying, God, you know, it's just all this spirituality sucks. How did I get sucked into this scam? You can be in that, and still, it's this. And it's possible to come to know that because it's true, and it's all obviously true. And so this, you know, again, this, as you say, this sort of drifting off from it is a golden opportunity to recognize that, to train in that. And it happens spontaneously. It's not like you need to do anything. But as one matures, as unfoldment proceeds, you know, the recognition becomes more and more powerful as one drifts off it, that the sense that this is it too becomes, you know, it begins to sort of talk louder and louder.
Peter, you wrote about resistance and non-resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expound on how one could be non-resistant?
Yeah. Non-resistance is, this is actually, this is a nice point. Non-resistance is everything is just as it is. There's no needs to be different, needs to be more this or needs to be less this. Just bang, here's everything. It's exactly as it is. Everything right here, right now. And it doesn't need to be different. It's all just. And so there's no pushing and pulling on it. Its very nature does the pushing and pulling, and that itself, you're not pushing and pulling on that.
Or another way to say it is just total acceptance of what is.
Yes, but it's not an acceptance that's contrived. It's not an acceptance of saying, "Oh, I have to accept this." It's the acceptance that is it is. So what's not to accept?
Michael mentioned to me once this notion, or that when you feel tension, when there's a sense of tension, or even using the word "should" in my vocabulary,
Yeah.
I was like, "Well, should." How the hell do you know what should be going on?
Yeah.
You know, it's well, that shouldn't have happened, really.
Yeah.
Well, what should have happened? So erasing, I mean, having a look at that, watching how many times the word "should" comes up in my vocabulary, and also what Michael mentions, when there's a tension, what do you, I mean, in terms of James's question, for me, that was another salient thing of, wow, look at how tense you are about this. What are you expecting?
Yeah, but
which is all part of it. But.
Yeah, there's a finer approach. There's a finer aspect of that, which is even when a should comes up, it's okay with that.
Right.
So a should came up. It's like that's what happened. So there's tension. That's what's happening. And so even if there's resistance, if there's non-resistance to the resistance, it's ultimately non-resistance.
Right.
So
that takes a while. I mean, it took me
well,
a freaking while.
There's a kind of a simple, it's a biggie for sure. There's a there's a logic tree that follows from that, which is very, very simple. It's a series of questions you can ask yourself. So, you know, so here, this is happening, you know. And so am I okay with this? No. Okay, I'm not okay with this. You know, I wish it was different. Okay, am I okay with that? I wish it was different. Maybe yes, maybe no. Let's say no. I'm not okay with that. I wish it was different. I wish I didn't wish it was different. Because I'm saying shoulds and I shouldn't be saying shoulds. Okay, cool. Am I okay with that? So you follow a step with this, and sooner or later you get to a point where you say, that kind of sums it up. That's what's happening. And at that point, you look at it and you discover you're absolutely okay with all of that. So there can be as many layers of not okayness as you want, and you're okay with them because that's the truth. That's how I really feel. You know, I don't like this. I wish it was different. I wish I didn't want it I wish I didn't want it to be different. And yeah, that's true. All of a sudden, effortless ease, floating in the breeze. So this is a trick to get to non-resistance, even when there's apparent resistance. So it's not a matter of fixing the resistance, but having no resistance to the resistance.
Right.
Or finding the
Right.
perspective from which you have intrinsically no resistance to the resistance. And if you follow that, if you follow that, those steps of inquiry, you get to a point where you finally say, yeah, I'm okay with that. That's the truth. I don't like this. I'm not okay with it. Wish it was different. And I wish I was okay with it. And yeah, and all of a sudden, so all of that eventfulness is sitting here, and it's just sitting here.
Mm.
You don't hate that.
Yeah.
I really do not like it. I really do wish it was different. And wow, and all of a sudden that's like there's an inherent absolute equilibrium that you get to.
Yeah.
It's when you stop halfway and you're wanting it to be different,
Yeah.
and also wanting it to not want it to be different. That's where there's all this pushing and pulling.
Yeah.
But just step back a bit. You get to a point where, yeah, that's how it is.
Is equanimity and neutrality are kind of like it's an interesting thing for me because is equanimity and neutrality like we talk a lot about like people are acting like Ramana Maharshi without discovering what he discovered. So is equanimity and neutrality a symptom of discovering what's true, or is equanimity and neutrality something that is good to develop to discover what's true?
Well, definitely not the latter, and probably not the former.
Somewhere in the between.
Equanimity and what was the other one?
Neutrality.
Neutrality are symptoms of something, of a stance that someone has to something. And there is really no someone and really no something. So, in realization, none of those things apply. There's just what is. And there's no sub-portion of what is that's pushing and pulling on the rest of what is that needs to be neutral or anything.
Mm.
Or you could say reality is simply neutral with itself. There can be a hurricane and a nuclear war and a genocide all happening at once right here, and reality itself is just effortlessly being that, doing that, with no strain whatsoever.
So the equanimity and neutrality are really conceptual overlays on
That's
just
personalizing.
what is.
It's personalizing the inherent equilibrium of reality with itself.
Isn't there a sense to that unresolvability, and that's will lead you back there anyway?
Yeah, well, yeah, unresolvability takes care of everything.
There's nothing to resist, and nothing to resist it.
Yeah.
There's your equanimity, and neutrality,
Yeah.
and non-resistance.
Yeah. All roads lead to Rome.
Yeah.
We just talked about that at lunch.
Small world,
Okay.
conceptually.
And yet you never left Rome. Yeah.
That's convenient. That's why all roads lead to Rome. Where the hell else are they gonna go? You can't actually leave the Tete Chenpo.
Yeah.
There's no back door.
Yeah. Unless you have a retinal tear.
Well,
In which case, there's that empty space there.
Did you say rep?
No. Retinal tear.
you could have been a lawyer if you were an actor.
Understand why we have lunch alone.
Well, I see. I'm personally glad you do.
We were talking about, right?
That's that part.
What's a spiritual autolysis?
Autolysis. Autolysis means self-digestion. Spiritual autolysis is a style of spiritual investigation that was championed by a guy who pseudonymously called himself, what's his name? Jed McKenna. There's a non-existent person named Jed McKenna who wrote several books, and in it he extols spiritual autolysis.
We think that's your writer's name.
Actually, on the edge. If I was Jed McKenna, the books would be much less well written and much more on point. That guy's a hell of a writer. Well, I'll leave the quality of his spiritual advice to posterity.
Where's it here? How do you get rid of conceptual thinking?
You don't. You get rid of it by seeing that you are already out of it. Most of your experience is non-conceptual. Conceptual thinking takes up a very small piece of real estate. It's like, how do I get rid of this chair? Well, I don't need to get rid of the chair because most of the room is not the chair. So if I want to be without the chair, I can just hang out elsewhere. And likewise, most of your experience is not conceptual thought. All the sense fields are direct presence. The presence of thought itself as an energy phenomena is direct presence, even though seemingly conceptual thought is happening within that medium and so on. And oftentimes conceptual thought stops on its own. If you're distracted, if you're startled, conceptual thought stops. You start to fall asleep, conceptual thought stops. All kinds of conditions. If you look at your experience closely, you'll notice that conceptual thought actually subsides from time to time. But as I say, it doesn't need to. It's not the bad guy. The problem is not conceptual thought. The problem is absolute absorption with conceptual thought and supposing it's more important than the rest of your experience, and that the rest of your experience needs to be seen in terms of conceptual thinking.
In a way, thought becomes conceptual thought.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thought
Same
is,
thing, but it just suddenly appears different.
yeah. The existence of conceptual thought is itself a very curious phenomenon, because it's nothing, and yet it seems to be something. I mean, small children, it takes them a long time to be trained to have conceptual thinking.
Or mothers.
And fathers. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? As you break, notice as you wander around and do whatever you do, notice that it's all still just this experience.
I'm not ready on my.
Are you sure, Ron? Are you sure?
Sure.
That you're not pregnant?
He's having.
At least not within the last 30 days.
Well, I did have a big lunch. I was sick.
And I'm gonna go home.
Alright.
Cause I was.
Maybe tomorrow we can go around.
Yeah.
Maybe tomorrow.
So you read that?
Oh, you're going home?
No, I'm going home.
No.
Well, yeah,
What is it?
you can call them up.
Oh, yeah? All right.
And who told you what was the restaurant?
So like fat. I know what fat
Oh,
is.
yeah, we were gonna, they have a hotel there too. You
Yeah.
can stay there.
Cool,
Yeah.
thanks.
It's right downtown.
Yeah.
It's a good rate.
Yeah.
I've never even heard of
Yeah,
that.
no, you do.
Quite a
They
ways.
just have a few rooms, I think.
Yeah.
Or at least that's
But even
right.
the restaurant.
Oh. the
Yeah,
restaurant.
well, on weekends.
What if you dropped your name? If we dropped your name.
Drop my name.
Yeah.
I've already had enough.
That's cool.
I'm in like. Anyway, so have a good.
Okay, yeah, so thank you. Take care.
Bye bye. Sister.
Yeah.
Is he taking off now?
No, not yet. Soon.
How are you, Ben?
I'm fine, John.
What is, oh, sorry.
Hello.
It's a fictional word?
And your son?
And we're just doing together.
Yeah?
Yeah. But it's a lot of work, mostly driving around.
So what's the nickname for sleep?
Salika. We used to call her Salika, and then we found out we were saying it wrong.
Wait, this isn't Urdu?
Arabic.
Arabic?
I thought it was Urdu.
So it's probably sleep. What the
Oh,
hell?
it's Salika.
There's a lot of.
There's no ka in, is it Salika?
Wait, Salika's an Arabic
It's not
name?
ka? Like when they have KH and usually it's ka.
Yeah, it's KAH, but it's not.
Oh.
In Urdu is pronounced Salika, but it's an Arabic name, right?
So what's gonna be the nickname? You're not
That's
gonna
what
say
It just has to come.
Salika.
Salika, get your butt on in.
Hang
Val
on.
sounds so like.
You know, he's Bauer.
Val, Sally.
Sal? Sal?
I think, I mean, it's still common.
Sal?
How her friends are gonna call her Sal.
Before your friend, her friends, you're in policy.
Anyway, we're hoping, we argue.
Maybe it might.
But we also.
Or we have some friends, young kids with names like Sally and
What's your nickname?
forget. And like, I don't know.
Chinese just don't have it.
But like, no, the kids end up correcting their friends or the adults. They're like, no, don't call me that, call me Sal. They correct people. So then they end up getting their full name all the time, not their nickname. Well, people call me D.
Her graduation.
What up?
D.
I've
been so drowsy all day.
articles that I sent her and he was, yeah. I mean,
I like this,
well, I, of course, yeah, and I just don't believe a lot of propaganda. And the people seem to be isolated. I mean,
Were you in India back in the day?
Yeah, that's really good.
In your travels, been all over the
I know
world?
you like doing your thing.
Spent a few years.
It's such a
Few years.
It's loud.
What years were those?
It's right across the street from,
60s?
No, 77, so 81.
Wow, you with Papa?
No,
No.
it's like one.
it's some dude, some, this guy.
Oh, so you were in Washoe also in
We went last night,
India
it was like,
and Pune and all that.
it's like one dish after the other. Like,
What was the other one?
Oregon.
gas.
Here.
Oh, in Oregon, here.
Guest house. See, is it super expensive or not?
I bought, because my friends were working. I thought it just.
Right.
Is
Is this like new or like the last?
So any more travels?
The last
Coming up?
2 weeks?
I hope not for work,
Oh, right, yeah.
but yeah, I'm like, not really particularly enjoying the work. Taki has something in Italy.
Oh, zeal.
Yeah, with the translation.
No, she said it's in English.
But there's still
Actually,
gonna be a
I do like Italian. I like the pause. You're not, you're less fixated on kind of understanding.
Did you catch her in Berkeley in February?
Yeah, just once or twice. Yeah, we sat for a drink afterwards.
Oh, well, you know, everyone does
Be right.
one.
Her topic was
Yeah.
the other thing is too much.
Which one? The one on sexuality?
It's just something they just come up.
But she did that for the,
Yeah, that's just for the market.
she doesn't like doing that stuff.
Open circle. You should just show up.
Because the whole, it was like on Valentine's Day, that was the only one I could make, that was great. But then I was running from like, I don't wanna spend like 3 hours driving around.
Why 2 hours?
Yeah.
I mean, guys have to get there after work and like, figuring out, right, all that
Which is
stuff.
good, you should have.
Well, that's what
Right.
You know, we went to this Thanksgiving this morning.
No.
But I rather just think I like it more than talking by bringing, it always brings up more.
She's very psychological, I felt, back then when I listened.
I'm almost at the point where I'm not even listening to words. Like even here, I wasn't here just listening. And it's just like, like being just like, just allowing everything. And they hold it, right? And then it's really cool when you say, and this thing, but sometimes I forget to study zero. I prefer the talks here than the other place that, what's his name? So great. Jeff? I don't know. And he worked kind of like, this is what I learned all this. I'd rather just be in silence with them versus give you presence in a way.
I actually went to LA, Rupert's wife.
He's really into like breaking
And
down
it's,
the
I like it. It's, yeah, I think you would like it because it's not words, it's just more like body exploration.
Yeah, here's the deal. It's acid. I think because I need to, I'm gonna face, and it's temporary, it's enough where I like talk to talk. Other times I just want to like, stop. And just, there's other things happening about this. You know? But,
Not even that is sort of a conceptual, the words, because you,
and that's the next.
if you tune into the sounds, it's like,
Shit, what is the neighbor one?
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Which
Some
neighbor?
guy called it.
How are you feeling?
Good, just fatigue. They're trying to, home stretch is just tired all the time.
Eat a ton?
No, I can't put too much.
Really? I
It's
thought
like
you eat a
there's
lot
no
when you're
room.
in that state.
I ate a lot more my first drinks. Like I'm eating less and less now. I think it's the body will get like, I think I had, yeah, maybe if I didn't eat earlier, I'd be eating more now. Balancing itself.
I thought the whole fading thing.
That kicked in hard, second trimester, eating everything, anytime.
One of the
Now it's
snowboards,
like-
I was at the snowboard World Cup
Yeah.
last week working on
Not too bad.
Oh,
God.
God.
And,
Where's that go?
yeah.
Was it Mammoth? Like,
The sleeping thing has been interesting last month. Seriously. It's like, it really affects my mood. It just, the body's repairing, right? So I think it's 3 hours.
I mean, they like literally, Suzanne, they like literally like fly.
I haven't had it.
Oh.
I think you'll probably miss it. And
Yeah.
feel-
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I honestly, I think that I was a couple of.
Hey, you never know, you might like
Yeah. Yeah.
Chinese genes, Chinese are
I have
like, my
no
brother's
idea.
kids,
Really
they're
good.
slept
I mean,
12
I
hours.
We would totally, I would be like winning the lottery because I know my body is like, it freaks out when I doesn't get it. Every night. You know, now I
You get
haven't
it?
had it. So I'm seeing myself change already in terms of like behavior, mood, like just like I don't want to get out. I don't want to do anything. the postpartum stuff, they say could hit earlier. Like postpartum depression kind of thing, like when new moms are like, so they're probably just, it's really related to the body, health of the body.
So I didn't answer, it's like, I was waiting in the air, yeah, and he shows up at my office, and I'm like, yeah, whatever the point.
Some parents and the kids don't get.
Speaking more slowly and then their language and
Yeah, and that's like, I don't know if I would call it postpartum depression.
But he's the one that said these could.
Yeah.
But maybe in Australia,
Yeah,
no
I'm
means
trying to get
yes.
as much as I can.
See what I'm saying? It's a pilot.
Trying to just
Maybe in their culture, maybe that makes.
I don't get it. Especially working
You'd have to say,
it's like,
I'm just saying.
go to work, I'm like training.
You get a
Found
temp.
a really awesome temp from my position, and now another position open. Or I'm gonna train another person to do like a different part of the more accounting instead of accounting.
What do you mean by that?
It's gonna be adult. Really mean, but I feel good because it's like, okay, I got my accounting stuff transitioned to this.
Don't be quiet up there, mister.
And then now
Oh, I can,
have
he's radiating.
Oh, I know, you can hear.
Yeah, very loud.
You can read his language.
That's his inner thoughts right there.
Yeah.
You get ears.
I have the best pictures.
Guys are good. Yeah, we've now be home and starting May 1st maybe.
Oh, awesome. What's the due date?
But I'll still be like, emailing.
Borderline
We'll never
Gemini.
get in
I
there.
know, I kind of wonder if it's Gemini. I was done with something with Gemini. I'm Taurus, May 14th.
So there's none. What Chinese? What's it?
Oh, so they're really
And I do,
Well,
the
just the
opposite
years.
of spiritual. They're like really,
I do a lot more.
my mom, you know, my mom is very sick. So they're really, earth oriented, like really.
That was that.
Material.
Yeah.
I have fancy preferences or something, I don't know.
I'm excited.
Yeah, she's really happy. Scanning all like more stuff for us still. I'm like, I think I have enough stuff. She's like, do you have blankets? Do you have baby goods? Oh, yeah.
This is just.
No, my brother, my older brother has something. Yeah, yeah. And my sister might not have kids, she's really not that kind. Yeah, I'm reading like an astrologer and he's, yeah, I don't have kids. Who knows? We don't know anything. I think you could read this in like.
That guy. Very worried. But I want to enjoy it.
Which guy?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, he's bummed out.
It's his problem.
Who's with the long face?
Doesn't that mean
Bada-boom.
we're a troublemaker kind of?
I don't know. What he called about the construction that's happening?
Maybe parking. I don't think that's related.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
Yeah, many of our
Right. I'm sure there. I hope it's not. Are you sitting here? Oh, no, I'm just saying, okay.
Looking for a picture.
Welcome back.
I'm having some trouble with the connection. Please try again.
Turn that off. It's on airplane mode.
It's on there.
So today we've been looking at this from a lot of different angles. The challenge in presenting this is that there is no formula. There is no way that it is. This itself is every way, is any way. And so there can be no formulaic or formal way of approaching it. This is fine, particularly as one becomes more sensitive and mature when it comes to see this. But in the beginning days, it can seem to be a challenge because, well, how do I work with this? What do I do? You know, what does the yoga consist of? And so, we've touched on a bunch of different different tricks that you can work with to try to, prime the. But this itself is absolutely open-ended. And so it allows for absolutely open-ended approaches any way whatsoever. And so the open-endedness with which I present it is in keeping with the flavor of what it is in itself. A lot of spirituality errs in being too formulaic. and in this formulaism, there's the implication that somehow you do your work, you put in your time, and then you're going to end up with something that is a goal of something. And the nature of this is not really like that at all, because what you're really doing is discovering what you always have been, discovering what's always been inalienated with the case. So you're not actually achieving anything or getting anywhere. You're really coming to recognize what has always been so. Which recognition can happen at any time, in any circumstance, because you fundamentally already recognize it. You already know that which you're trying to know. You already recognize that which you're trying to come to recognize. And so it becomes very paradoxical. It's almost like a game that you play with yourself, with your own mind, to try to recognize that you already recognize it. And yet, that's the nature of the beast. It's peculiar. It just happens to be that way. So you're left without much. You're not left with much. Here you are. Here this is. You're on your own recognizance. You're the one who is engaging with this. You're the one who is discovering this. And you're the one whose resources will be brought to bear as you learn effective ways of engaging with this and really progressing in it. So it's very individually oriented. It's very oriented very much. It depends very much on what things seem to be to you at the time, that dictates where you go from there. And there's not a single answer to that either. You have many, many options. But always the important thing is to stay with the reality of where you actually are, rather than trying to jump into some theory. Oh, it's all one, so yeah, it's all one, but do the math, see that it's all one. Prove to me that it's all one, and then I know that it's all one. Just saying it's all one, unless you see that it's all one, doesn't hit you a lot. Doesn't pay the bills. Of course, seeing that it's all one doesn't pay the bills either, so that's neither here or there, but. So this yoga doesn't leave you much to hang on to. And that's kind of the point. Here you are. This is it. Check it out. And then what that looks like, it depends upon your own inspiration and ingenuity.
Going back to concepts, I thought you seem to say that concepts, I thought you said that basically it wasn't a problem. But I thought having concepts and preconceived notions and thinking what's going on there are the problems.
Well, the concepts aren't the problem, it's believing in them, it's believing that they're true that's the problem. Remember when we started talking today, I talked about how it's almost as if you exist in two worlds. One, the world of interpretation that the imagination supposes this to be, and the other, the actual world of your experience. Now, you don't actually live in the world of your imagination, but usually people think they do. In other words, people believe their own interpretations, which are concepts. Now, the problem isn't the concepts, the problem isn't the interpretation, the problem is holding them to be true. If concepts are actually just hypothetical, they're possibilities. It's like saying maybe. If before you said or thought anything, you put the word maybe, that's what thoughts really are. Maybe I'm Peter Brown, maybe this is Sandra Feld, maybe we're having a spiritual talk here. That's the truth. If I'm Peter Brown, this is Sandra Feld, we're having a spiritual talk here, has the implication that somehow is actually true. Concepts are never true, for the simple reason that this actuality happens to be inconceivable. In other words, you can't have a concept that's sophisticated enough to accurately capture the fullness of what's actually present in the experiential actuality. Experience is too rich, too dense, too variable, too dynamic to be able to sum up the totality of all the qualities that are present in a concept, no matter how elaborate.
Well, how do you get rid of the habit of believing concepts?
Well, you don't need to get rid of the habit of believing them. Again, like when we were talking about addictions a while back, it's the same thing. You don't need to get rid of concepts, just pay more attention to non-conceptual experience and get more familiar with what that is like. And as you get more familiar with it, the very nature of that will invalidate concepts. It'll disprove concepts because you become very familiar with the richness of direct experience, and it'll become more and more obvious to you that your concepts cannot fully capture that richness. The concepts are like a sketch. If you have if you go down to anything, say you go to the beach and you sit at the beach and you have a 3-year-old piece of paper and a crayon and they put a few marks on the paper and say, look, this is what the beach looks like. It's like, yeah, but not really. There's a little more going on than that. And concepts are always just like that. Concepts are these pathetic, oversimplified stick figures, but actual experience is an infinite richness, an infinite dynamism. And so simply letting yourself notice this over time, you become more and more, it becomes more and more obvious to you that that's so. And so then you begin to see the narrowness and the oversimplification that concepts actually are. And as you do so, the concepts themselves, the richness of experience itself that you're experiencing and recognizing disproves the concepts spontaneously without having to do anything about the concepts. And the concepts won't stop, like we said. When you'll come to see, you'll stop depending upon them. You'll stop looking through them so much and see that they're just sort of ideas about things. They're like a rough sketch. They aren't the thing itself.
So the answer to most Crowley's questions, quote unquote Crowley's questions, is just to feel and be as intimate with beingness as you can.
Yes. Yeah. That's it. Right there. Bang. And that spontaneously does all the heavy lifting. That spontaneously straightens you out. And it's fun too. So there's that.
In one of there's one of the links you have on your website by Rinpoche, I forget, but like he talks about how being with experience, whatever way it's coming up, can release tremendous energy from the system. I'm paraphrasing a little bit.
Sure.
What's like? So is it helpful when you get in these intense states of like frustration or anger to really get sensitive, hoping that whatever the knots are in the system energetically get released? Or
Yes, but you may have less success in any given instance than you will over time. In other words, doing that, you're all stressed out and all of a sudden doing noticing in that context may not immediately totally solve the issue. But if you do that regularly over time, it will tend to, yes. I mean, the trick is be with what is present, be with what is actually present as it is, not in terms of what you're thinking of it as being. So here's your experience is present. It's not what you think it is. It's not whatever labels you would put on it, but it's here and you're fully experiencing it. This includes psychological states. This includes emotional states. This includes physical states. It's all just right here, nakedly displayed in complete fullness. And it has no words. It's non-verbal. It's just what it is. And just that, feel that as it is, and all of the misinterpretations are released. As I say, maybe over time. Because the habit of orienting to concepts and thoughts is very deep and persistent. It's a lifelong habit, and so it's not liable to be dissipated in one sitting. But hey, you never know, you might be a prodigy.
I spent quite a bit of time lately watching my reality show, CNN, Fox News. And if you want to look at how concepts are absolutely pokeable and see-throughable, a couple of shows about, wow, check you out. I mean, the different points of view about what appears to be the case. It's,
yeah. Yeah, heated emotional assertion does not necessarily make truth.
No.
You're talking about beingness. It seems like if I don't go straight to beingness, then I'll get all tangled up.
Yeah.
For me, that's, I gotta go there.
Yeah.
And then it all gets revealed. But if I do anything before I go to that,
Yeah. Sure. Well, everyone's like that. You know, beingness doesn't have an opposite. So if there seems to be anything other than beingness, you're in fantasy. You're running into God knows what. And so it's not liable to be particularly clear or useful. Whereas beingness is the actual context. It's the actual, it's the overview. So from the point of view of beingness, everything fits into place, you might say. But from the point of view of anything that seems to be something, all bets are off in terms of what is it? How does it relate to anything else? Beingness is the only completeness. It's the fullness, so it includes everything. And so everything's in its place in that context. And by beingness, I don't mean the abstract concept of beingness or the philosophy of beingness. It's actual, this right here, that is, this certainty. In a profound sense, yoga just means hanging out. It doesn't mean not doing anything. It just means doing whatever you do, being whatever you be. Just that. Just this. You're sitting here and you're listening, you're thinking whatever, and then you get up and you walk out the door and you walk out to the sidewalk and you go to the car or whatever. All that is just what is. It's just what's happening. It's just what the beingness looks like. Does itself. Thoughts pop into the awareness. Sensations are there. They come and go. All this weird fluidity. Ongoing without end. It never goes anywhere. It doesn't come from anywhere. You don't gain anything. You don't lose anything. It's this weird, ever-changing flow of seeming apparition.
It's really cool when you apply that to work.
Yeah.
Work doesn't become, it works no longer work.
Yeah.
I remember when I started doing that like 10 years ago, I was just like, oh, I'm just hanging out. And, wow, look, I got money, cool.
Yeah.
It was like,
I'm hanging out, but my hands happen to be doing this, and my thoughts happen to be doing this, and
Can you talk a little bit about, because I've heard in your talks that there's this, it struck me as cool. the idea that, one is doing something for the end result, but it's actually the end result is irrelevant. It's the doing.
Yeah, because there is no end result.
Right.
Whatever you're doing seems to lead to whatever you will seem to be doing, which leads to whatever you seem to be doing, which leads to whatever you'll seem to be doing. It's not like you ever get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You came here to be here, and now you're here, and then you leave, which takes you somewhere else, and then you're there, and then you do something else, which takes you to the next thing, and takes you to the next thing. It's just endless, flow of weirdness.
Right.
that doesn't ever become anything other than this presence.
And the concept is, if I'm working with wood, I'm building this box for that. Actually, the box is irrelevant, or the end result is not irrelevant, but it's all of it.
It may happen. It may happen, but as that happens, it itself is just more endless flow that leads to more endless flow that leads to more endless flow.
Right.
And you meet a woman, you get married, you have kids, the kids grow up, and then they grow out and they meet a woman and have kids, and what's the goal? Where's the end? Where's the beginning? Weird shit leads to weird shit, which of course leads to more weird shit.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the formula. So we think in terms of achievement or goals, but whatever is achieved is going to disappear and morph into something else.
I think that really did number on personal will becomes and then
sure,
the concrete realization that nothing can add up to anything.
Yeah.
Because it's already pre-added or whatever.
Yeah. But personal will may be present as much as it seems to be present,
right,
which is neither here nor there, and that, has its day on the stage and there's this whatever. But it's not like it ever gets anywhere. And yet, you're free to participate in all sorts of ways to the extent it seems to be that way. If you want to try and achieve something, you can have that and try and achieve it. Why not?
when I want to.
Yeah. Or not, But it doesn't matter one way or the other, so you have freedom. It's not like you need to not achieve because there's nothing there. Achievement isn't really achievement, but unachievement isn't really unachievement. It's all just more weird shit.
There was definitely a level of disconcertingness about that, but I'm no longer disconcerted with.
Nice.
But it was disconcerting.
Well, it's very easy at certain points to have all sorts of notions about making one's mark and, being, fulfilling one's purpose and all these kinds of things. And again, that's the kind of thing that's great. If you can figure out something that feels like that, then have at it. Why not? But don't expect it to solidify into anything in particular. Don't expect it to, at the end of the day, turn out to actually have been that. But again, have at it or not. It's all good.
Is that just like a karmic flavor? Because I'm in the, I don't feel like doing anything camp.
I know that about you. I think we're kindred spirits in that way. I think we're soul brothers.
The path of least resistance. I just want to drink my chai with a lot of sugar. That's pretty much it. Cheers.
Yeah, this is karma. Why are you you? Why do you like what you like? And again, like we were talking about earlier, when you look very closely at that, it seems to be that if you don't look too closely, but when you look more closely, you can't really find what it is or how it is because it's too intricate and the patterns don't actually resolve into being any particular precise way. But again, that's not an argument against any of that. That's not an argument against being the way you are. The fact that you're not really the way you are does nothing to do with how about being the way you are. You know, a cardinal aspect of radiant presence is it looks different from different perspectives, and there's an infinity of perspectives. So it can look like absolutely normal life of humans going about their business. It can look like, you know, transcendental hyperspatial lights shining in infinity. It can look like absolutely nothing. It can look like, you know, gods and goddesses dancing energy dances and through in amazing. It looks like anything whatsoever, depending upon the perspective that it's looked at from. And no perspective is more or less true than any other perspective. So again, if you have a proclivity to want to see it, to enjoy seeing it from a certain direction, and you have any degree whatsoever of being able to navigate to these preferred directions, then have at it. But you're not changing anything or gaining or losing anything by doing that. You're just taking advantage of the fact that it's all basically the same. You have is absolute freedom. This is not any particular way, but whatever way it seems to be is due to the perspective from which it's observed, not from the thing itself. It's like the ultimate Rorschach blot. There's literally nothing particular happening here. And yet this nothing particular is infinitely intricate, so it can be seen as all an infinite range of particularities. And it's just a matter of what particular perspective it's being looked at from. And these perspectives, you may have discovered that you can navigate these perspectives to some degree. I mean, this talk today, you know, we walked in here, we sat down, you know, and, you know, because of our discussion, we've sort of moved through various different perspectives that are implied by the things we've talked about and the way we've talked about them, which sort of brings up different aspects of, oh, this is this, and oh, that's that, and oh, this is this, as if it's some kind of a journey or navigation through different aspects. But we're all just sitting here, just like we were when we started. Nothing's happened. It's just, you know, taking advantage of the fact that these different perspectives yield different implications in terms of what this is seen as, what this is felt to be. And you're free to take advantage of that to whatever degree you're able to navigate to your own preferred perspectives. You know, you enjoy being transcendental and, you know, sit back in the transcendental light. You know, you like to get shit done and go out there and do it, you know. It's all the same. So it's just a matter of, you know, enjoying your freedom to be with it however you're able to do so. Or to notice that however you are with it, you're not gaining or losing anything because it's not some other way that you think it might be able to be.
Can you say the last part again?
However it seems to be, you're not gaining or losing anything by it not being some other way you think it might be able to be. In other words, you might look at it and say, gosh, my life looks like this. Wouldn't it be nice if it looked some other way? You know, I don't have a lot of money. Wouldn't it be nice if I had a lot of money? But in actual fact, when you see that those are just different perspectives, the niceness of it and so on, you see that, you know, you wouldn't actually gain anything. Your life wouldn't necessarily be great if you had lots of money, and it's not necessarily horrible now. I mean, that's just arbitrary, you know, hypothetical example. Or, you know, you know, you might say, I don't feel very motivated now, or I'm really, I wish I was more motivated. You know, but again, it's just, you know, things wouldn't be better or worse. They'd just be different. They just look different. You know, as you explore this more and more thoroughly, it becomes clear that you don't ever gain or lose anything. you just have this, and after you go through whatever you go through, you still just have this. You never have more or less than this. And whatever it looks like, it's not more or less than this, depending upon what it looks like.
You have to grow into that seeing. You can't, I mean, it's not really powerful to think about it.
Oh, no, it's not. It happens to be that way, in fact. And as you explore it, you will come to see it more and more clearly that is so. Oh, it's essential that you see it for yourself, or it's not powerful. It's just a fun notion. Or not so fun, whatever. I mean, that's why it's useless to be with this stuff as a philosophy. I mean, it can be a fun intellectual exercise, but it's not personally transformative. It doesn't affect what it feels like. Whereas when you come to see for yourself, that's where it's powerful. Because then you discover, as you discover your true nature, you have to partake of the nature of this, which happens to be spectacular.
That's sort of like when they say, then when you realize you're not, there's no, I guess you can say, will to try to change anything. Whatever is coming because it's all this anyway. So you're not trying to change the dream, which is.
Well, you may or may not be. It may be your nature to be trying to change it. You may be ambitious or something, but you don't need to change that. So yeah, it amounts to the same thing.
And one of your links you have there to, I think it was the Chan Masters, and I found on the same website they had from Bodhidharma's teachings. Talks about non-attachment, which sounds fairly similar to what we're talking about.
Sure. I mean, the powerful non-attachment is seeing that nothing exists to be attached to. Because you can't pin down how anything is. Being attached to something is silly because you're not really attached to the thing, you're attached to your fantasy of it.
Feels real.
Well, sure, it may feel real if you believe in it, but it's not going to be satisfying because it isn't actually real. You know, believing in the Easter Bunny and, you know, being attached to the reality of the Easter Bunny isn't going to get you very far because the Easter Bunny is just a fantasy. And your fantasies, it might be great. I mean, this is the whole reason for yoga, the whole reason for spirituality is because the implications of the way humans ordinarily interpret their lives are full of unsatisfactoriness, full of limitation, full of failure, full of, you know, partiality, full of lack. And none of these things actually exist in reality. When you come to see what reality is, then you're free of all these difficult implications of consensus reality interpretation of what you are.
Peter, wouldn't you say that in a way is something to be gained, that seeing, the clear seeing of reality, versus someone who is deluded and lost in the attachment of the world and of the lack and everything you say?
It can feel like something to be gained, but you're not actually gaining anything. All you're losing is the fantasies of unsatisfactoriness that you may be familiar with. So you lose fantasies of limitation, the fantasies of unsatisfactoriness, so that can feel like a gain, but actually it's a loss of imaginary difficulties. Where there are none, so you discover there's no imaginary difficulties, that feels great. So you said you gained that, but on the other hand, you already actually had that. So you haven't really gained anything. Of course. You just recognize it.
Even if we don't know it.
Of course.
So that there keeps, it's like, it is paradoxical. There
Yeah.
just seems to be this desire to like constantly need to see clearly, or if you have friends or loved ones who are obviously suffering because they're deluded, then you kind of like want to share with them this reality of clear seeing that there's really is just, there is no lack of anything.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a moot point, because then we talk about like, well, there's no gaining or losing, and there's no right or wrong. It's all ways are it, you know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of pointless.
Well, it may or may not be pointless, and yet you can you can feel free to manufacture any pointedness you want.
So fine.
So if you want to go out and try and save people from their delusion, have at it. But good luck, but have at it.
No, yeah, I know. I've been there, but it's interesting.
Peter, this is my last question for you. Okay.
You must be at the last page.
There's no such thing as time, actually. Time is the essence of the mystery. Look at what time is, and you'll have the solution to everything.
Yes.
Could you just expound on that?
Well, if you look for time, you look now, obviously, because here we are. This is now. So you look for time. Well, now is here. You look for the past, you don't find it. All you find is memories that claim to be of the past, and those memories exist now. And you look for the future, you don't find it. All you find is thoughts that are supposedly about the future that exist now. So all you can find is now. And when you look at this now, you don't really find a now, you just find this that's here, which is now in the sense of time. But since it's always now, there's not really time, it's just this that's here. And so when you start looking at this that's here, you have everything. Because this that's here is everything.
Radiant, beautiful, luscious, central beingness.
Right on. Dude.
Just trying to convince myself.
You don't need to convince yourself, just check it out, it'll do the convincing. You don't need to work too hard. Would you all like to knock off, or would you like to go a little longer? Sometimes the first days on these 2-day events can be a little wearing. The first day is kind of like working your way uphill, and the second day is coasting down. So the second days tend to be a little more fun. Well, you'll notice that. I notice it consistently. So. But it's about a little after 4. If you'd like to, we can knock off now and resume tomorrow morning. We can go a little longer if you feel like it.
I've had enough.
Let's have it. That's a day.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.